Right. So the idea, right, was for us to kind of come up with a statement, right, to counter, I guess, if you will, right, some of these statements here. So I know Salika was engaging you all with this activity, and I was kind of on the sidelines with it. So from you guys, what were some other kind of comments or statements that you guys came up with for some of these different arguments on the back of this page? If you guys still have it. Yes? We good? I know it's been a long day, folks.
Yeah.
It's been a long day. So we're on the home stretch now, okay? We're on the home stretch. Sure.
So number 17 is, you've lost your temper, so I don't have to listen to you anymore. So if I responded, well, then you talk for a while, is that not good because it's turning the conversation over to them and giving them free license to say whatever they want?
You want to dig into that one, Jim? I have some ideas, but...
Well, so first I would say you need to decide whether you've actually lost your temper or not, right? Have you lost control of your emotions? Because a lot of times people might say that gaslighting you more than it's actually happening, right? So you decide whether you've lost your temper or not. They don't. And secondly, I don't think it's inappropriate to turn it over to them or to even take a pause. If that was actually the case, say, you know what, I do need a minute just to compose myself, and we'll continue this discussion. That's not ideal, but that's better than you speaking just directly out of emotion.
Yeah, and I know that, part of this, right, is not to acquiesce, to use your word from earlier, right? But at the same time, we have to understand that this is a dialogic process, right? So you do want to keep those modes of communication and dialogue open, right? You don't want to position yourself in a way that runs counter to the idea of having dialogue, right? So in some instances, right, it may be, and someone used the term earlier, kind of be somewhat self-deprecating, right? Right? Understanding that you don't necessarily have to win the battle to achieve the outcomes of the war, to use those terms kind of generically, right? Because there is a process. And I think oftentimes we just kind of want to short circuit the process. And if the dialogue is not going our way, we'll fight you. Yeah, right? So I enjoy, Mark, I'm really enjoying you, my friend. We're going to have a long friendship. Yeah, so that's just my thinking, because I think sometimes, too, we don't want to give away or dispense of our power, right? At the same time, there is power, right, in giving up space. There's power in that, right? If you understand that the ultimate goal is to continue this dialogue in a constructive and an efficacious way, right? And I think that's important for us to remember. And I was thinking about that when you asked that question, because a lot of times we just want to deflect it or want to run away from it, especially when we deem it as being, counterintuitive or counterproductive, right? And that's when it gets really messy and hard to want to continue that dialogue. So sometimes we do have to step back.
And jumping off, I think what Rod said, that self-deprecating or just saying, hey, that actually speaks to how passionate I am about this particular issue.
Sure. Yeah, and it's really how you frame it, right? It's how you frame it, and we haven't really been conditioned excuse me, guys, we really haven't been conditioned, right, to kind of think about how do we reframe these conversations, right? And it's hard. And so sometimes you have to really like have some forethought. And how do you do that, right? And so that's really what we're trying to say here. We don't have all the answers, right? Because it's so situational. It's so situational. And so some of these, you know, contexts, right? You have to kind of have some forethought going into them. You know, if this were to happen, how do I reframe it, right? Using this vocabulary of motive, right? Because everybody is trying to use language, right, to reposition their justifications for behaving in a certain way. So we have to be thoughtful about how do we use vocabularies of motive, right?
I'm just up here being valid.
Yeah, so other comments about this derailing activity before we move forward? Yeah, that was 17, right?
Numbers you want to be talking about responses to? Any particular ones you want responses to?
So let me kind of, if I may, guys, let's look at number 18. You're damaging your cause by being angry. Let's think about that for a second. What is it about this notion of being angry or being like over emotional that almost automatically allows us to be dismissive of others, right? What is it? I'm just kind of posing that question to you all. Because in some way, we're always kind of told that, right? We may not use the word, oh, you're angry, right? But it's situated in such a way that our emotional state, right? Because we may be a little bit impassioned or emphatic about something, right? Oh, you're angry. So therefore, I shouldn't listen to you. So how can we rethink that? I'm just kind of tossing it out there to everybody. Because I think this is one of those areas that oftentimes we're kind of attacked on, right? Being overly emotional. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right?
Whether we're emotional or not.
When I'm told I'm over emotional, I usually respond with something like, it would damage whatever the cause is more if I was silent. Or I tell them I'm emotional because I care.
Right.
I feel like you're not listening.
Sure. Absolutely. So that was a response to number 18, guys. And I think, again, right, it's the framing. You know, I'm emotional because I care. Now, how can that really be, like, disputed, right? If you were to say that to someone. Well, I'm emotional because I care, right? Go ahead.
I'm wondering if it's cultural. How much emotion certain cultures think is acceptable and others it's different, right?
Yeah, it's cultural, it's gendered, it's everything else, right? I mean, let's be real. I mean, men in this country, right? We can yell at the top of our lungs, right? And we're just being heroic, or we're being assertive. And assertiveness from a male, right, is okay. So we've been conditioned to think, right? However, when a woman does it, right, it carries a completely different meaning and a completely different justification, right? So then how do we reframe it? And I love what your response, right? I'm emotional because I care, right? So these are things for us to kind of like think through in terms of how we're pushed against the wall, right? How we're pushed against the wall and then somewhat attacked, right? Because of these different historical orientations that are used against us, right? To define our supposed motives, right? And so I would encourage you all, you know, as we continue tonight and as you think about this, you know, beyond tonight, right? think about how can you begin to kind of reframe, right? How you might be attacked, and even sitting around a dinner table when you're meeting with Uncle Joe or whatever, right? Because you already know, it's likely he's going to engage in those same conversations, right? So how can you reframe these conversations with Uncle Joe?
Or Uncle Joe.
Poor Uncle Jojo's getting beat up.
Well, absolutely.
I will say that I do have an Uncle Jojo, and we have actually trained several of the cousins that when he acts up and says, "Oh, you're getting emotional," or something like that, everybody yells, "Off topic." Even the little ones. And it's just kind of hilarious. And then we laugh, and he goes, "Off topic." And then we laugh again. So this is where having some bystanders and allies in the room is important. If you know you're doing this in public, make sure you have some allies there, because they will help you. Now, if not, you can say off topic. You can also say you're focusing, we have to focus on this topic. You can do the what questions. The what questions and the why questions.
No, I don't have the answers. I'm just curious as to some possible responses to number 10 and 11.
So I can remember them.
I can read it if you want. So number 10 is, unless you can prove your experience is widespread, I won't believe you, right? So that's number 10. And it kind of goes to what, is she with us still, about the emailing experience?
Yeah, she had to leave, but
Okay,
yeah, that's
yeah.
number, at number 3. And that goes to that evidence thing.
Yeah, the evidence-based.
So again, this is my, I'm going to slap a sight on you and you'll never want to do that to me again. This is where the statistics happen. But I'll be honest, once you drop the statistic, they're going to say, well, I still don't believe. And that's where you say, that's where the logical ref comes in. Asked and answered. You asked, I answered. We have to move on. Because you can't let them get you down that rabbit hole of always asking for more. Once you have answered, then they have to prove it's not. Or you can play with Poe's law. Poe's law is that all satire on the web doesn't look like satire. Occam's razor, once you've dropped it, simplest answer is usually the right answer. So if you've dropped that site and they're going, but, Occam's razor, and you walk on. By the time they've finished Googling Occam's razor, the whole conversation has moved on. Does that make sense? But,
Yeah.
Hold your space. And once you've cited it, or once you've said, this is our discussion, my favorite one, I have a brother who went to law school. But he was a criminal lawyer. The argumentative was. Because those lawyers are calm, because y'all have to negotiate contracts and do that. He's the one who was going to argue with people. And he would say, well, you have to prove it, you have to prove it. The day I finally learned to say, I am a grown woman. I pay my bills. I don't have to prove anything to you. I know this. This is my expertise. Was the day he finally backed up and respected me. So when they start saying that, prove it, prove it, prove it, sometimes the right response is, I don't have to prove anything to you.
Yeah.
I have said this and you need to respect it. Or I will separate myself from you. Does this make sense? Just because they demand it doesn't mean you have to accept it. Drop your end of the road.
So,
Questions?
well, I was gonna
And I didn't mean to
read
pick
number
on
11.
lawyers. I love lawyers. I have a lot of lawyer friends.
Yeah, Salika, I was going to read number 11 real quick because she asked about 11 as well. I don't think you are as marginalized as you claim. That was number 11. I don't think you are as marginalized as you claim. One of the things I'm really beginning to think more about is this notion of how. I think we've become pretty well endowed when it comes to expecting the how and the why question, the what and the why questions, right? But for me, when you, like for example, if you ask the question, well, how do you define marginalization? How do you define that? Right? That's a different type of question. And it requires people to reach deeper, in my opinion, in terms of providing situational evidence. Right? It's a different type of question. Right? And so if you say to me, right, I don't think you are as marginalized as you claim. Right? So my response might be, well, how do you envision or how do you define marginalization? Right? Because for me, when they begin to unpack that, you can draw from that, right, where they are situated motivationally. Right? And I think sometimes the types of questions that we have in responses to these, right, can kind of help us know where to go with it. If the person's response, and Salika mentioned this earlier, teeters on being more of a good actor as opposed to a bad actor, you will know, right, how far you want to take that conversation dialogically with that person. How authentic, how genuine they are, right, to really situating themselves within the context of that question. And I think a lot of times we don't do that enough, right? When we're trying to kind of like debunk some of these narratives. And I think my thinking is I want to become better at posing questions within the realm of how. Because I don't think we ask that enough, right? And I think it requires another level of analysis in responding to that, right? And so that's what I would encourage you all to kind of start doing. And again, when they respond, right, I think you make a judgment. You make a judgment. And then you can say to yourself, let's go further with this. Or you can make that judgment based on how they respond, right? This may not be the hill that I want to die on today, right? And so I think we have to be very strategic, right, in terms of how much time we focus and dedicate to, right, fighting these issues in some regards, right? Because not everybody is going to be a good actor. Yeah.
Can you?
How much time, how much energy? So, yeah, that's a question I have. How much time and how much energy? And when do you just sort of, walk away and have to leave the relationship? So I'll tell you my personal experience. There's a young man who's a classmate with me in law school. I'm a recent law school graduate. This person who's on the opposite side of the fence. Trump was the best person. The United States is the best. And very, he took me in as, in a sense, like his mother, because he needed that. And as a young man in pain, I think he was a gay man who had not really told anyone. He was just struggling in pain, and I could see that. But more and more, he would, for example, he used the N-word with me as a joke. And I didn't know what to do. I said, well, what, should I just walk away? And then I tried to tell him, I said, you know, because I care about him, you never say that word. He said, well, I was just telling you. I said, you never say that word to anyone. And we just continue that relationship, trying to, see if I could just, steer him. I wasn't trying to convert him, steer him, because he needed some guidance. And recently, he's very upset with me for many things, but recently he posted, he's been after me for my Facebook posts, but he posted, he's this idea of patriotism. Everybody wants to come to the United States, so you cannot condemn the United States for anything under the sun, and so he's angry with me. He posted a picture, the planes that were taking off from the airport in Afghanistan. People were literally hanging onto these planes, and there's a picture of, somebody falling, and, they basically committed suicide by hanging onto the plane. And he said, see how such a great country we are, that everyone, wants to come. They even, come to the United States. So, it was just a ridicule of a very sad situation. And I don't know. I think we just have to walk away sometimes. It's just too hard. Just too hard. And how do you do that?
When they're not, is this thing working? Yep. When they're not going to respect you, you walk away. When they're going to use a slur against you, I'll be honest, the first slur is going to be it for me. They sling the N-word, I'm going to say, that's all you got, and I'm gone. Because the slur itself shows me the level of disrespect. And the one thing we have to keep in mind, we are not the masters of the universe. We cannot save everyone. The people who respect us, who will listen to us and share the same values, are the people we can work with.
We say that love is unconditional, but relationship is conditional, right? And so you can love this person and walk away from the relationship if it's harming you.
Yeah. Yep.
And sometimes you have to set that boundary to protect the people with you.
Yeah.
I have a lot of biracial students in my lower division class. And a lot of them, when we talk about biraciality, talk about their deepest pain is when their parents do not protect them from family members saying the N-word, from family members slinging stereotypes, from family members being racist. And it's more prevalent than you think. I call it the Roseanne problem because there was an episode on Roseanne where she did this and tried to justify it. And people just screamed and came out of the woodwork. If you have a biracial child, you have to commit to cutting people out who are a threat to your child. If you're going to be interracially married, you have to commit to cutting people out who will insult or potentially hurt your spouse. And this is kind of like domestic abuse. One done. Because leaving sets a boundary. A warning sets a boundary, and people who are abusive will try to get around your boundary. So leaving is a boundary. I have a cousin who's anti-Semitic. I bounced him off my Facebook. He's still whining about it. That was 2 years ago. And then he did the flying monkey thing. If you've been in alcoholic circles and AA circles, flying monkeys is when somebody who is trying to bash through a boundary, they get somebody else triangulated in to come and talk to you. In this case, he got my aunt. Let him back on your Facebook. He's upset. He's sorry. He's got, he'll behave. He got one warning. He went past it. Boom. No, not tolerating it. He can do A, B, and C. but he can't do D. And the fact that I stick to that has God's greater respect and means that other relatives know not to pull that mess on me. So there are levels, too, of setting your boundary. It could be you bounce this one off the Facebook, but you'll still talk to him in person. It could be that you'll only talk to him by text. Or it could be you cut him off completely. But when you're dealing with someone who doesn't respect you, you have to cut them off. Because disrespect leads to gaslighting, leads to messing with your reality, and it leads to your pain. So you have to set that boundary. For me, disrespect, name-calling, racial slurs. My husband does not tolerate any name-calling in our house. The minute the kids start calling each other idiot, poopy head, stupid, all of that, he is the one who intervenes. I'm the one who intervenes when they start trying to shoot each other in the head with the Nerf guns.
So maybe there's some people that simply aren't ready to grow, right? And it's important for us to recognize that. There's also, I feel like I'm still learning a lot, right? I had so my wife and I have a black lab that we inherited from my dork son. So and it's a 2-year-old lab, and if you know anything about dogs, if you don't get him exercise, they'll get in trouble. So I walk him all the time, and my wife walks him as well. And we talk about, where do you go? Well, we follow the trail, we do this and this. Okay, so one time we were walking together, and I was going straight, and she turned. She's like, and I'm like, where are you going? And she's like, well, I go this way. And I said, well, the trail goes this way. And she says, well, I don't take that part of the trail. And I said, well, that's the easiest way. And it never occurred to me that because I'm a man, because of my identity, I feel comfortable walking that part of the trail that's dimly lit, that's in between the back of a parking garage and the river. She was like, are you crazy? I wouldn't walk there by myself. And it was a blind spot for me. It never occurred to me. But I was able to grow and empathize and figure that out. There's some people that are open to that, and there's just some people that simply aren't ready, that may be ready in the future, but just aren't ready right now.
So excellent point, Jim, and Salika too, when you mentioned the comment, since you guys are kind of sharing some personal anecdotes here, right? So I'll talk a little bit about me and try to make it relevant to your experience, right? So you all saw my wife earlier, right? You all, stop it. So you all saw my wife earlier, right? Before I met Angela, I was married to a black woman, right? I was married to a black woman, had 3 kids with her, and I was with her for almost 20 years, right? Well, I met Angela, she's a white woman. You guys get where I'm going with some of this? So there were some friends and family who this was an affront to. This was an affront to, right? On many levels, racially and otherwise, right? So I had to determine in advance if certain people did not meet certain thresholds, right, in affirming my relationship with Angela, right, I was not going to allow myself, nor Angela, or our relationship to be contaminated by, right, their refusal to accept my relationship with Angela, who happened to be a white woman, right? So I lost some friends. Was it painful? Yes, it was painful, right? But I knew that from that pain growth for me would occur, right? And I learned a lot from that. And so there were some people just based on just pure religious beliefs, right? Who felt like, if you get divorced, you shouldn't remarry, right? So you have to kind of understand where people are coming from and know, as Jim mentioned, right, that some people they just aren't ready. They're not ready. They're maturationally or otherwise, right? So you have to move forward, because otherwise you're going to wallow in pain. You're going to wallow in pain, and that is too much duress to place on you, right? You have to move forward. And I think for you have to determine what is your threshold, right? What's your threshold? And once you realize that, right, you can be comfortable, but also think that you must be true and authentic in articulating that too, to your friend, right? Because then that, in my opinion, gives you some absolution. It frees you, right? It gives you a sense of grace that you've done all you can, right? And now I've reached this point of summation, right? And I'm going to tell you why. And then it becomes that person's responsibility. You can remove yourself from that, right? And that's, for me, for some of the friends that I've lost, I had to tell them the truth. Like, this is what it is, right? And based on their reaction, some of them remained friends, some of them didn't, right? But I wasn't going to wallow in that pain. I hope that helps.
I'm going to go back to Uncle Jojo, because we've been beating up on Uncle Jojo the entire time. Uncle Jojo doesn't get to be an obnoxious twit without enablers around Uncle Jojo. Does this make sense? Sexual abusers don't get to do that without enablers around them who make excuses or minimize. Child molesters, especially incest ones, will have abusers around there who minimize. Domestic abusers have people around them who minimize and normalize. And people who will disregard your values and harass you have people around them who are enabling this and will minimize it. So if you think about this within a family, systems therapy, a dysfunctional family, and dysfunctional families don't have to be families of origin. I mean, you can have a workplace that's a dysfunctional family. This person needs a boundary, but you also need to look at the people around them who you share in common who need a boundary too. The reason why they're doing it is because the other people let them get away with it. That's why they're pushing back on you. So while you may have to push back on this obnoxious person, you need to also push back on the person saying, oh, he's just too old to know better. My mother's 86. If she can do better, they can do better, right? My husband's father was 94 when he died. And he went in his lifetime, in the span of about 15 years, from being homophobic to being open and welcoming. For my students who are gay and they're out and they have parents who want them to hide who they are because certain aunts are unhappy or certain uncles are unhappy or their church might not be happy, I have to tell them, you have to ask them, do they want you in their life more than they're worried about these other people? And some of them will say, I don't know if they do. And I said, that's an awful parent who will put these other people over their child. If you have to separate from that parent to save your sanity, I want you to think about how awful that is. To help them think, does this person want you in his life more than he wants to be an obnoxious twit? Turns out my cousin wanted me in the life more than he wanted to be an anti-Semitic jerk. He's not back on my Facebook. I have kept that boundary. But he can text me. But if he texts me anything anti-Semitic, boom. And he's not willing to lose the texting because he knows the Facebook is gone and the Instagram is gone. So one of the things you have to ask is, does this person want me in their life? You know, all too often we're going, well, we need to put up with this because we want this person here. But we have value. We have a lot of value. And it is absolutely fair for us to say, you need to make a choice. If you're going to have the relative who is going to call me the B word at Thanksgiving every year, I'm not going to come to Thanksgiving. If you're going to have the relative who calls my biracial or triracial child any sort of name and then tries to say it's a joke, I'm not going to be there. Your presence is a boundary. I had to teach my son. My son is a wonderful, loving person. He likes to think that he can save everyone, that your presence is a gift. And if this so-called friend cannot behave properly when you were there, you absent yourself. And if they continue to not behave well, that absence becomes permanent. Because the core thing is disrespect. For me, it is disrespect. If we've got a common value, we can find a way to that common value with a respect for the differences. But if you're going to be calling me the N-word, there's no way to work that out. And when enough people put boundaries on the ones who are acting up, it's amazing how they begin to behave. The people misbehaving tend to cluster into groups. But when all the bystanders put them in space, they stop. And that's why bystander intervention is so important. So that would be where I sit. In the United States, every time a leader has risen, who has had the potential to bring people together, whether that's a labor leader like John L. Lewis, a white religious leader like Reverend Reeb during the Civil Rights Movement, or Martin Luther King, or Malcolm X, who was working across racial lines when he was killed, whether it's Fred Hampton, who was working with indigenous, poor whites, Latin kings, as well as the black people in Chicago, whether it's the mysterious killings of leaders last summer and the year before. When people rise to lead these movements, the people who want to hoard power weaponize our criminal justice system against those leaders. And what I'm showing you is what systematic racism looks like. Systematic racism is a law in Wisconsin that used to make it a felony to pee in public. Who do you think got arrested the most for that? Do you think it was here, or do you think it was Milwaukee? So now you have a felony, and you can't vote. At least in Wisconsin, after you have finished your sentence, you can wait 5 years and get an expungement. In Mississippi, you lose your right to vote for life. In Virginia, you lose your right to vote for life. There's a line in this movie I didn't show you. It's Michelle Alexander saying, "This system has systematically killed everyone who could bring together people at the bottom because they are afraid of divide and conquer." What is on this paper is divide and conquer. I'm showing you what imperialism looks like when it's inside our country. We have important work to do. And part of that important work, my marginalized friends and my white allies, is that y'all have to be the ones to break these barriers. There are certain things I can do. There are certain things you can do. But the stereotypes, the disinformation, the stereotype of black criminality, the stereotype of the Muslim terrorist, the stereotype of the sly, slick Asian, the stereotype of the Mexican criminal. All of these are weaponized disinformation. And what we've done today is to try to give you the weapons to begin to fight that disinformation. Because until we fight that disinformation war, we're not going to be able to dismantle laws that in some states, like New York, make it a felony to sell a single cigarette. When I came here from Ohio, I encountered drinking tickets. After 3 drinking tickets, if you leave them enough and you don't show up in court, the fine becomes over $2,000. What happens when the fine becomes over $2,000? Anybody know? It's a bench warrant and it's a felony. You need a felony conviction to take away people's rights to vote. You need a felony conviction to put people in prison. You need a felony conviction to take away their citizenship rights. And the reason why people are okay with this felonization of minor silliness is because they believe the stereotypes. So we have to walk out of here and fight the stereotypes. And fight the people who want to maintain those stereotypes by derailing, by pushing, and by exhausting us. Jim, Rod, do y'all have closing words?
Taking off on that, I think it's important that we do transcend the stereotypes, and there's ways that we can do it pretty easily. When we're having those moments with people that bring up stereotypes, that we'll talk about, there's no systemic racism. And it's really asking questions. Well, in Wisconsin, in beautiful, tolerant Wisconsin, 92% of white kids graduate from high school, and about 65% of black kids graduate from high school. So I ask students, why do you think that is? Do you think melanin in your skin somehow makes you bad at school? I think there's really using facts to transcend stereotypes are certainly certainly effective. And I just want to thank everybody. I hope this has been valuable. I hope this has been worth your day and a half. I always learn stuff when I'm part of these things. So I really appreciate it and I'm grateful for this experience. So thank you.
You know, The fact that you all are here says something about your constitution as individuals, right? It says something about the hope in the humanity of a community, right? It says something about what we can be if we remain united, right? It also says something about what's oppositional, right, to what we aspire to be. We understand what's at stake, right? We've unpacked a lot of that in the last day and a half. And courage, is huge in the work that we have to be willing to engage in, right? To do some of the things that we talked about for the last day and a half. Courage clearly has its limitations, right? And what I mean by that is, oftentimes, we are as courageous as we are willing to be open to accepting of fear, right? Accepting of fear. And what I mean by that is, we have to understand that it's okay to be afraid, to have fear, right? It's a natural thing. It's a normal thing. But I think in our society, we frown upon fear, right? We have been taught or conditioned to think that fear is a sign of weakness, especially for boys and men in our society. I would just encourage you all just to embrace it, right? Embrace the fear, embrace this notion of vulnerability, right? And because from that, we grow, right? When we allow ourselves to embrace the fear, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, right, in these spaces that we may find ourselves in, where people are actively opposing us, right? It is okay. It is okay to be frightful. It is okay to be vulnerable, right? And some of the techniques that we talked about, the breathing, right, and some of the statements that we can make to try to redirect, right, to continue the dialogue, these are just all different ways, I think, that we try to humanize one another. It's interesting. I was kind of having a conversation with Rita a little bit earlier about how things seem to be so dyspeptic, almost dystopian, right, in our society now, right? And a lot of it is predicated on fear. Think about that. Think about how fear is being used to sow and maintain division, right? So let us not walk away from that, right? In terms of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to embrace this idea of fear. Because I think that's what allows us, right, to work through the nuance, right? And to see people as humans. We're all perfect in our imperfections, right? And I'm just honored to be a part of this conversation with you all. I hope that, we were able to be illuminating in any regard or respect that you guys found, meaningful to you, right? And I welcome the opportunity to someday perhaps be able to work with you all again. So thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you.
We want to thank Mark and give him a round of applause for organizing all of this and admitting. I do want to say that Conversations in Color, Rod and I are on it, Amy has been on it. We'll be coming back to Converge Radio October 1st.
October 1st?
October 1st, the Monday.
Yes.
It'll be the first Monday, so I think it's actually October 3rd, but it's that first Monday in October. And Ed has something crazy already in the works. You're good for it? October 4th. And that's Converge Radio 101.9 if you are here in Eau Claire. If you are not in Eau Claire, use the TuneIn app and you can find Converge Radio. And we always are talking about a conversation that's about race, that's about sexuality, religion, a difficult topic where we're bringing people together. But we want to thank you for staying with us this entire time. And the Conversations in Color Facebook. We want to, and there's an Instagram, and I think there's a Twitter, but I don't run those. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for holding on all this time. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thanks. For them, let's hear it loud. There's no one in this room who didn't have an important part in making this happen, so thank you.